This is all growing out of the, I would say, panic from the Delta variant. And that panic is expressed by Jim Cramer on CNBC. Here's what he said.
Starbucks, which is getting crushed on a good quarter, by the way. Kevin Johnson's been talking about the great reopening, human connection. Well, what happens if it's the great reclose? I mean, in order to be able to get to herd immunity in this country, we're going to have 100 million people get COVID. With the way that this Delta variant goes, 100 million could be very quickly. I wouldn't be surprised if we got 100 million people sick in 9 weeks.
I mean, is it possible to say something that's too stupid so that people get embarrassed, Clay?
I will say this. I give him credit at least for talking about the fact that people do get COVID, because it's like natural immunity doesn't exist in any conversation that you hear in the media. It's all about the vaccine rate, who's getting vaccinated, who's not, and nobody talks about the reality, which is like 100 million people, a reasonable estimate that's probably too low, that includes Buck Sexton, yourself, and me. We both had COVID. And there are tons of our listeners out there that have also had COVID. There's even more people who have had COVID that don't even know that they had COVID, probably, right? You haven't ever gone and got antibody tests. You probably never went and got a test because so many people are asymptomatic. Over 100 million people already have COVID. And I would point to this, again, focusing on data. India was rampant with the Delta variant, which is basically where this came from. And according to antibody tests in India, which, by the way, somehow they're able to do in India, and we can't manage to get a reliable antibody study nationwide done in the United States. I don't know why that hasn't occurred, because I think that all the focus is on the vaccines and how much money the vaccine companies are going to make. So vaccine. But in India, they have over two-thirds of that country has now had COVID, mostly the Delta variant, and their cases have disappeared. If you look at the charts on the number of infections, COVID has basically vanished now in India one more time, if you look at the data, Buck.
If you looked at the data in New York City in June of 2020, based on the serology testing they had done at that point, they had 20% of the population with antibodies. So that was 1/5 of New York City a year and basically 2 months ago, or a year and a month ago. And now you're going to tell me if you extrapolate that out, if you look at what that would mean, it's clear to me that you've mentioned the 100 million figure. That's a basement level. That's a bottom line level.
Yes.
It's probably higher than that. But we also have to see, given all the mitigation, all the things that we've been forced to do, the shutdowns, the lockdowns, the masks, everything, how many people do you think would have just been infected in this country if we hadn't done that? I mean, we're already talking about getting close to half the population that already has been infected with COVID. And look at all the things that we did. You have to wonder, how could anyone think that these mitigation measures were effective? How could anyone really look at what's happened in America in the last 16, 17 months and say the public health community really nailed this one? They really got it right.
Itself.
I mean,
no,
the
it's
CDC is a partisan joke.
That's accurate, which is why I think we need to stand up in the House to this power grab by Nancy Pelosi. Will we? Be interesting to see.
Somebody in this chamber is coming from a hotspot. Somebody represents the hotspots. And they get in a plane and they fly here and they interact with all of us. And then we leave here and we go home to our families. Some take care of their sick parents. Some take care of kids who may have an autoimmune disorder. And I just find it absolutely immature and appalling to somehow diminish it to try to score cheap political points. And that's exactly what we saw a few minutes ago. That is beneath a minority leader of one of the major political parties in the United States of America.
Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. There you had Democrat Tim Ryan sounding like a total jackass, which is really his skill set. He's quite good at it. He does a good job.
It's his brand.
And I just want to break this down for a second, because we're going to have Minority Leader McCarthy with us in just a few minutes here talking about this and everything else going on. And there's a lot of things happening in the country right now that aren't masks, but you'll notice the Democrat fixation is on this right now because they still feel morally superior in their long embrace of Fauciism. They think that they're the good guys in this battle against COVID. But let's just take what Tim Ryan said there, the congressman from Ohio. Let's take what he says for a moment and just unpack it. That if you don't want to wear a mask when you're in Congress, you're a bad person, you're a hot spot person, you're a risk. All of these members of Congress who are Democrats, I assure you, are sitting in restaurants, going to bars, doing things where they're around unmasked people all the time. But
they're also vaccinated.
Right, but the point is they're already being around unmasked people constantly, all the time. But in this one place, at this one time on Capitol Hill, they think that they're going to be making people safer by forcing people to mask up on pain of being arrested. I mean, McCarthy understands this. Minority Leader McCarthy understands, I think, what's really going on here when he says this is about people wanting to control other people. This is about...
It's just like their philosophy. They want to mandate. They want to impose. They want to tell you when you can go to school, when you can eat. You know what they're going to do if you walk into this building without a mask? They're going to charge you $500. Why? Because they got the power to do it.
I want to see this challenged, Buck. And what I mean by this is maybe the lawyer in me following through on the process. But if you get a speeding ticket, most people just pay their speeding ticket, right? Most of the time, if you get pulled over for speeding, there's a good chance that you were speeding. But if you want to challenge the speeding ticket, you have an opportunity to show up. You have a court date. Your arresting officer will be there, and you can defend yourself against the speeding ticket. Now, let's say, you had an emergency. You were driving. You had a pregnant wife with you, or as we found out yesterday, a pregnant person, as they now teach in medical schools. But let's say you had your pregnant wife with you in the car. Maybe you feel like you were justified in speeding, and you want to challenge whether or not you should have gotten a ticket, right? Let's presume that somebody's crazy and gives you a ticket in that situation. You have the right to do it. Do you have the right, if you get fined $500 by, and this is what I'm excited to have soon-to-be Speaker McCarthy on in the next hour, but I'm excited to ask him this question. Can you challenge it? Is there a forum when you are fined $500 for something that is illegitimate in terms of wearing a mask? In most of American society, there is not a situation where a government official can just charge you a fine and you have no due process to challenge that fine.
Well, I'm sure you could take it into district court. The district court would probably say that Congress has the right to do this.
They, though? But that's what I'm saying.
Minority Leader McCarthy just said they have the power to do it.
They can put the rule in place, but is the rule able to be enforced if it's actually challenged through due process? And I used a crazy example, right? Like if Speaker Pelosi said, hey, from now on, every time a Republican speaks in the House, he has to wear a ridiculous cat-in-the-hat top hat, or I'm going to fine him. She's the Speaker. She may have the authority to mandate that rule, but if that rule is challenged, where's the next step, in other words?
It has to go to court. I mean, it would have to go to district court. I mean, there's no special Congress court. They don't have some other...
That's what I'm saying. I would, if I were a congressperson or a staff member, I would get challenged and I would take that into a court and have a hearing on whether there's any legitimacy whatsoever for the new rule to be applied.
The problem, Clay, is that unfortunately a lot of the courts have been very, so far, I would argue, cowardly, even at the expense of the Constitution, in defending rights against the lockdowns. We saw this most notably with a lot of deference given to states that shut down churches and places of worship while they kept other things open or had very specific and clearly punitive rules in place for places of worship as non-essential, right? Your church is non-essential, but going into a Costco to be able to buy a Lazy Boy chair to play your PS4 in, that was essential the whole time. So I'd be curious to see. We will ask the minority leader about it in just a few minutes. I'm also curious to see what the teachers' unions are going to be up to when they're already saying kids have got to mask up. Here's Randy Weingarten of the AFT, American Federation of Teachers.
We want schools to reopen and have a safe and welcoming climate in the fall. Delta threw us a real curveball. And, the lack of the herd immunity and enough people being vaccinated and, kids not being able to get vaccines 12 and under. Well, vaccination is the number one gold standard that we need to, bring back our masks for schools. We're going to keep kids safe. We're going to keep our members safe. And we're going to try to open up schools, and we're going to try to move through this political battlefield.
It's a political battlefield because they've made it one. Because the teachers' unions have sided with adults and the Democrat Party at the expense of children at every stage of this pandemic, including the unforgivable decision, and it was really just taking children hostage so that they could make demands for teachers to work from home. If the person who works at your grocery store or the drugstore in your neighborhood could show up throughout the pandemic, teachers could show up at least in the fall of 2020, but they didn't. And Clay, I don't think that they're done trying to extract concessions and use this, it's about our safety thing. What are we even talking about when it comes to teachers and their safety? If they're vaccinated, children don't spread it easily to them, and they should be fine. But
it's not only that, Buck. They got bonuses. They didn't work for a year. They sat in front of Zoom classes for wherever they wanted to be. They destroyed the education system. In particular, studies out now showing, not a surprise, that the kids who failed the most during lockdowns were minority kids. You've got the Democratic Party that claims to care not about equality anymore, but equity. I can't think of anything less equitable than insisting that poor kids not be able to go to school in person, falling behind over a year. And, Buck, we're talking about 18 months later in many places. By September of 2021, these, I think, frankly, indefensible teachers' unions that are destroying the fabric of our country in so many ways will not even allow the kids to be in school in the fall of 2021. It's madness, pure, unadulterated madness.
There's been
and I know a lot of parents agree with me.
No accountability for this whatsoever.